Hello, Caroline Monnet.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
How do you feel about the premiere of your movies here in Hamburg?
I'm glad that now it's done, and I was really happy that it was a great turnout. A lot of people showed up for indigenous films and short films, especially. That's always complicated. But there was really good response, and I'm happy to be here and show the films in Germany.
I prepared my questions for you in French,
Okay.
but we're going to do the interview in English because I think maybe English has a wider reach. So let's start off with a really problematic question already. Which language is more difficult for you to speak if you cannot speak your native language? Is it more problematic to speak French or to speak English? You fight with your work colonialism. Which language is more problematic?
It's an interesting question because both languages are colonial languages. I guess my first language is French. I grew up in a household where we spoke French. My father's from France, but my family on my mother's side, who's Algonquin Anishinaabe, they were colonized in English. So I've always navigated between the English and the French. But I feel more comfortable with the French because I went to French school. And I only really learned English when I was 19 years old. So that came pretty late in my life.
You said as well that you feel that the fact that you speak two languages, that you really navigate in English and in French with ease, has given you a certain power, has given you a lot of liberties. How do you reconcile that, or what advice would you give to organizations, to people who want to keep native languages? How do we do that? How do we maintain the diversity but still provide the means for people to have access to power, to facilities, to schooling, to jobs, etc.?
Well, I said that it was complicated, and I was lucky to be fluent in both English and French, because in Quebec, in particular, Indigenous communities don't speak English. English is often a third language, so they don't have access to the diversity of opportunities and the networking, the global networking that's happening within the Indigenous communities, with the Samis, the Maoris, with Australia, even South Africa, and the rest of Canada. So that's why I was able to navigate those opportunities, because I could speak English. But I want to tell institutions it's not about English or French, especially on Canadian land. It's about honoring those languages that were present before English and French, before those colonial languages, and honoring those languages from the territory, because there's also a diversity of languages. In Quebec only, there's 11 different languages, 11 different nations. Which means that each part of Quebec itself has a different language and culture and mindset. And institutions are starting to realize that they can play a role in bringing those languages back. I do it on a daily basis as often as possible, when I enter institutions like museums. I always ask that the cartels and my work be translated in Anishinaabe, which is the traditional language of the Algonquin people.
So let you introduce yourself in your traditional language.
Kwe kakina, Caroline indigenikaz, Muniang nitochi, Tanjekichi menendan, Nindi nungum.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask some other questions, some of the questions that relate mostly to your work and some of your previous work as well. You are a multidisciplinary artist, so you have sculptures, paintings, you've developed textiles, you dabbled in fashion, etc. Why multidisciplinary?
Well, maybe because I was very privileged to grow up between two cultures, between two continents. Like I grew up between the Outaouais region in Quebec and Brittany, France. And I always felt if identity is intrinsic to territories, what happened when you come from two territories. And I think I don't need to choose. And that translates a lot in my work. I don't need to choose a discipline. I can be a multitude of things, multitude of identities, and it's just different ways for me to explore themes and subject matters. And ultimately, it's all the same. Every art form and discipline comes from the same artist behind the work. So often think that it's the message that dictates the medium that I choose. Certain topics don't translate well in moving images. It translates better in sculptures. So yeah, I always try to find the best way to achieve a message, and that's when the medium is decided after.
And if I may, I think that we are seeing these mélange of different art forms more and more, where ballet is mixed with classical music, where art is created to music, etc. And I think that at its origin, if we look back at the origin of art, it used to just be art. It wasn't les arts. It wasn't the arts. So art at its origin, in its original form, was just a means of communicating, of expressing ourselves, of telling stories, of passing on knowledge, on passing on customs, etc. So originally people danced, painted, spoke, chanted. It was a mix. Do you think that societally, socio-psychologically, we have more of a need to come back to these origins? And I'm not even sure why we would. Perhaps there's too much media exposure and we need to kind of have more of a complex or all-inclusive, something that appeals to all the senses. How do you see it? What do you think?
Yeah, it's very complex. I think art has a tremendous power to educate and raise awareness. But I think it's also very exciting when art forms start to collide and you have disciplines that don't necessarily fit together but start influencing each other. And we need that. Our world is so charged with media, with exposure to different disciplines, and we're in real need of new voices, of new things that will expand our minds and will make us more connected to humanity and connected to our priorities, because we're in this very fast-paced world. And I think art is a way to calm us down and to really start reflecting. And that's why paintings is amazing, but maybe filmmaking is the highest form of art somehow, because it encapsulates painting, performance, photography, music. That's why we call it the great art. It's the septième art. It has rhythm, and rhythm is where emotion lies. And I think maybe that's why I'm so drawn to that. And filmmaking is a place where disciplines can start to coexist, and that's interesting.
Although sometimes, if we look at children's education, it's always recommended that children don't watch movies, that they listen to, that they read, or that we read to them, and if they can't, that they listen to audiobooks. So there is something about cinema that makes it very easy to consume. So perhaps it's what do you think about that? I completely agree. It is a mélange of all these different art forms, and it is complex, and that's why it's so appealing as well. I mean, it's not a wonder that people are gravitate towards cinema. But do you think sometimes it's a little bit easy to consume it and not think?
I think that's why independent cinema is so important, because it's a diversity of voices. It's unique voices with a perspective on the world that's totally raw sometimes and anchored in own individual realities and collective imaginaries. And that's very important. Of course, there's the commercial aspect of filmmaking, but there's so much more. The greatest filmmakers in this world did not come from the commercial realm. They came from their independent and their passion for cinema, real passion and real craft for making filmmaking. And we remember the filmmakers, don't remember the studios. And I'm much more interested in remembering and studying the great filmmakers out there rather than Hollywood studios.
And since we touched on Hollywood, how are indigenous values or ideals of aesthetic, and I shy away from saying beauty, I mean really aesthetic in all of its forms. Also, you mentioned rhythms. How are indigenous rhythms, forms of aesthetic different from Hollywood ideals, from these sort of more common Western ideals?
I think we can speak of indigenous cinema. It's a real thing. And indigenous filmmakers are really challenging Western ways of making films. And that starts at the very beginning in the script writing, in the way you interact on set, the choices that you make while making the film, in the process of making your film. The stories that is on the paper, starts on the paper, is coming from within the communities and from an authentic standpoint. And that makes a huge difference from the beginning. And then when you approach a film set removed from colonial ideas and structures that is often very present in a production setting, you can also change what is seen on the image. Magic can happen because you respect everyone, because there's no hierarchy. And it's a collective effort. And the vision on screen is quite different from what is seen elsewhere.
That's absolutely, you can see that in your movies. Would you give me a couple more maybe specifics of how you approach the sets that is different?
Well, for me, I really highly respect the collective effort. I don't think that I'm above. I never believe that the artist is on top of the pyramid is above, is a genius doing everything themselves. I always respect the people that contribute into making the vision happen. And maybe that's my very circular way of approaching the process of making something, whether it's in visual arts or filmmaking. We do this together. And that's a very indigenous way of doing and philosophy. Also, elders are very important into the process. We ask permission. We include other peers to read the script, to advise. We just make sure that it's a community effort, and that my biggest reward is when the community recognizes themselves on the screen, and that it's not about validating it, but that they support the project. And I do the films first for my community and then to educate non-Indigenous audiences. But the most important is that people recognize themselves on the screen and feel proud of the work that is there.
You said something beautiful about respecting the elderly or the elders in the interview after the movies. You said that you ask for 7 generations. You try to respect and remember 7 generations back, but you try to project forward 7 generations as well. Would you mind going into that? I find that such a truly lovely. My goodness. If we could all, you said sort of the aim is to become a good ancestor. Whew, I think we'd solve so many problems if we would all just aim to be good ancestors.
I think it's about realizing the responsibility you carry, especially when you become interacting in a public sphere and you have a platform to express yourself. That I do not take that lightly. It comes with a responsibility. I do it also for my ancestors, and I wish they could see. I mean, I know they can see, but they would be proud to see how far we've come. But there's still a lot of work to do for the next generations. So it's about situating yourself with realizing that we're all ephemeral, that we're part of a continuity, and that I can only do the work that I'm doing now because my ancestors survived, but did the work that they did. They're resilient, but also I have to do my part so the next generation can thrive and have a vibrant future.
And a lot of your work is a work of remembrance. It's a work of paying respect. It's a work of, in some ways, recalling the past and respecting it. So Marcel Proust comes to mind with his À la recherche du temps perdu, à la recherche du temps perdu, and of course his. The Madeleine, he made the Madeleine so famous because it evokes this moment bienheureux where the past can all of a sudden be revisited. What are Madeleine moments in your movies?
I don't want to revisit the past as much. I think the work is offering a glimpse into the future. It's really turned towards the future and hoping that there's some light in there, that it's not, we are not defined by our traumas or by the chaos that happen. It's a very violent history in Canada, but we can be more than that. And I think there's a lot of beauty within our communities, and a lot of resistance and resilience and eccentricity and beauty and elegance, and that's what interests me, is to put that on screen. So maybe a little girl sees my film and says, "Hey, I can be, everything is possible. I can be anything I want."
So you have already mentioned that your father is French and your mother is, am I pronouncing it correctly, Anishinaabe.
Yes.
Anishinaabe. So you have this métisse française within yourself. How does this manifest in your work? I mean, you've already mentioned the strong indigenous influence and concentration of your work, but how does it manifest itself in your work and in your person? Do you see it as mix? Do you see it as a union? Do you see it as a blend? Or do you see it perhaps as different parts that affect different, aspects of your life and of your personality?
All of my work is exploring my mixed identity and is influenced by both sides. There's a lot of duality in the work that I do, and I've come to the realization that I don't need to be 50-50. I can be 100 something, I can be 200 something. They're both very important. Of course, identifying myself as an Indigenous woman today is still a political act. We've come from centuries of assimilation and degradation of our matriarchal values. So it's very important to take as much space as possible. I do it for my mom. I do it for my aunties, for that generation that was not allowed to be proud of where they come from. But a lot of my work still bring in sometimes that French touch, because it's part of my education. Some of the work, the last short film that I made, Pidikwe, is looking at the Roaring Twenties, Les Années Folles, as a source of inspiration. And that's really present in the work.
This is a difficult question. What are your views on cultural appropriation? I'll leave it at that. I'll comment it after you answer.
I prefer cultural appreciation.
Thank you. Okay. Would you go? I'll let you say it, but I think it's such a difficult topic because, especially in the U.S., it's been a very delicate, very sensitive topic, and
it's not delicate. It's not delicate. You should not. Cultural appropriation is a no-go. Don't do it. You can appreciate the culture. There's so many wonderful Indigenous artists out there. You can consume their art and their work. Get to know the people, the entrepreneurs. There's so much out there. You don't need to appropriate.
I had this in a different interview already. I brought up the example of a good friend of mine in Hungary who married an Indian man, and she took to wearing saris. Is this cultural appropriation?
Probably not. She's
not Indian at all.
Yeah, but saris is not a ceremonial thing. It's a cultural thing. I really despise people going to a music festival wearing a headdress without realizing the harm it's doing to Indigenous communities. This is not something to showcase, and it comes with great responsibility to wear the headdress. It's ceremonial. I mean, I wish people would wear earrings. That's not appropriation, that's appreciation. Please consume earrings, moccasins, buy them. Encourage a living artist, encourage a business, a local business. It's very important.
But do you think it's sometimes really a question of intent? Or, sort of, what if someone's wearing this headdress or headpiece and they don't have any malicious intent?
No.
Okay.
No. It's one thing people need to know.
So there's a responsibility.
There's a responsibility, and it's creating a lot of harm. And our culture is not a costume. There's a lot of teachings that go into it. And no, you cannot wear. It's a straight no. You cannot wear a headdress at a music festival or anywhere else ever. Even I would not do it. Yeah.
but there are a lot of symbols for every culture, and I would not I would not be comfortable in saying that I know every symbol. What if I make a mistake? Or how do you know what I mean? Sort of, I think there is this education and this it's the importance of educating people on it or about it.
It's not that complicated. There's a lot of information online, and you need to contact people and just ask questions. And the community is not closed off. If you come with a good heart, with good question, and it's not about trying to take, because that's the problem often. And you have to understand that we're not all nation part of a one same thing. I would never do art that would be taking iconography from the west coast of Canada, for example, because this is not my nation. This is not the culture that is part of my lineage and my upbringing. So I would never do that.
Would you mind going into each of the movies that we saw today, just briefly? I wanted to ask you questions specifically about them, but I think if some of the audience doesn't know the movies or hasn't had the opportunity to see them, they won't know if I refer to Crossing a Bridge or anything like that. But perhaps from your point of view, one or two statements about each of them and what the most, maybe not each one, maybe pick two or three then. What was the most important message for you, or what was the most important starting point even?
All the films are about bringing a positive representation of Indigenous people on screen, especially women. It's about telling stories from the inside and a diversity of stories as well. From my own perspective as an Anishinaabe woman who grew up mostly in the suburb of Ottawa, and just trying to put to reflect on socio-political situations and lived realities that are happening in Canada, and to raise awareness, to educate. And for people to recognize themselves on screen. And ultimately, it's about trying to create change through art making and filmmaking. Hopefully, I'm able to achieve that.
So one last question. If you project into the future, how would you like to be remembered? What do you think you'd like for generations to come? What would you like them to remember about your movies? How would you like to be remembered?
That's a hard question because, it's pretentious to think that you can actually create change, or that you have a value into that the work that you do has value. But I hope to, I have this really ultimate respect for Abenaki filmmaker Alane Sobomsawin, and she's 94 years old now. She's made over 52 films. And she has the greatest heart of all. And I just really admire her for being able to work that long and to contribute so much to our communities. And I hope that when I'm this old and people see me and I reflect on everything that I've achieved, that I feel that I've done my best and that I've tried my best.
One of the comments you made as well was about how filmmaking, Indigenous filmmaking, has been somewhat liberated, that it fought so hard to exist. Now it exists, and now it can actually expand, develop. So you talked about, there are all these different forms. There's horror films, there's comedies,
Sci-fi.
there's sci-fi. So it no longer has to be just one specific genre. It can explore all these areas. Which do you think you will gravitate towards?
Yes, I think it's no longer about educating and self-definition. I'm interested in creating, of course, working in fiction, but continuing to do short films and continuing to explore the experimental form. But the next film I'm doing is really about friendship, and it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And I love to explore a little bit of punk in my film as well. So it's really trying to find that freedom, that creative freedom, and freedom as a woman, but also as an Indigenous woman.
Already in the short film Roberta, there is that lightness, although it's a heavy, exactly, but there's still this lightness in the colors, lightness in the movement. There is a certain humor to it, even though it is very dramatic.
Yeah, I think it's a rite of passage to speak about the traumatic event and the history of Canada and what happened within our families. But there's a real want to move to love and energy and friendship and just real stories that could happen beyond the identity that we carry.
Anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to? I asked you too much already. Caroline Monnet, thank you so much for taking the time.
Kitchimigwich.
Thank you. Merci. Okay. Wonderful. I'll just.
That was a full-on interview.
That's a full-on, yeah. I mean,
Very good questions, I have to say. Thank you.